Hi guys, and welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Today we're joined with, I'll do that again. Hi guys, welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Today we're joined by a very special guest, good friend and former colleague, Mr. Jamie Lau. Jamie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, guys.
So Jamie and I met nearly 5 years ago. Jamie was actually coaching me as a member at Into CrossFit down in Clapham, where I soon started working. And yeah, we worked together for a good amount of time. We've stayed in touch, always catching up to chat and train and see how our learning has progressed. Jamie, give the listeners a bit of background on how you got into fitness and what you're up to now, please.
No problem. So trying a long story short, rugby background generally, and then moved to Hong Kong to actually work in pro rugby as a strength and conditioning coach. And then from there, met some really good people, and we started CrossFitting, and Ed, my boss out in Hong Kong, he opened up a CrossFit gym. And back then in 2013-14, it was still relatively new, especially in Asia. So we did so much kind of fun learning and trialing things, and just really kind of breaking the scene. I think we were the second CrossFit gym in Hong Kong. And then we were lucky enough just to have a really good base of training, that in 2014 we qualified for a team to go to regionals, and we did in 2015 as well. And I was lucky enough to compete on both of those, which is its own experience in itself, and taught me a lot and really gave me a taste of both sides. So we were doing general pop kind of CrossFit, as well as, trying to be competitive in CrossFit team. Ant is now an individual, and he went to the games. So he's a fantastic athlete. And I've really seen him go from, being top 20 in Asia to now being the fittest guy in Asia, by, doing really, really well. But watching him go through his double day trainings and sitting on a bike. One time I saw him do a workout, which was genuinely 2 minutes of a heavy sled push, rest 10 minutes, 2 minutes of thrusters at 60 kgs, rest 10 minutes, 2 minutes of an assault bike, rest 10 minutes, times 3. Right? Like that. This was, early, and that was his PM session, and you just see him just like hazing in his 10 minutes of rest, but he was really going for it. And to watch an athlete need that to really be at the top level really kind of opened my eyes. So I guess back then we tried to find better ways of what we thought was doing CrossFit, and we learned a lot from doing that. Fast forward, I moved back to the UK, I think in 2016, end of 2015. And then, like I said, we were working with Ash. I was working with Ash then at Into CrossFit, and did a lot over here. Was really fun. Went to compete at SID, was really good. But then I guess from 2017 onwards, I probably stopped competitively CrossFitting, and then got much more into kind of rehabbing. I've had 2 knee surgeries and multiple injuries here and there, and that's kind of helped me on the, let's call it, functional rehab side. And I guess day to day now, I work much more with general pop people that have probably come from some type of pain, mostly into a one-to-one setting. And before all of this COVID stuff happened, I was in the city, out of freelancing out of a studio. And now I'm doing some remote stuff. I still program for people online, and have lots of touches in CrossFit. I met Rob when we were at WIT, so I've been down there a few times. My best friend trains there. I know Gus, I know those guys. So that's kind of long and short story in.
Perfect, thank you. And I think one of the things that we always talk about when we catch up, obviously talking about the elite side of CrossFit, how it's evolving as a sport, and also the, I guess, idiosyncrasies where sometimes the way people approach it is very far away from the way they should potentially approach it for their goals. So today I'd like to get some of your thoughts on your love-hate relationship with CrossFit, and maybe some of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'll let you crack on. I think one of the first things we wanted to talk to you about was the percentage work that people take from weightlifting and apply to CrossFit.
Yeah, we were chatting before briefly, and I think we have both all come from different backgrounds coming in, but I think we all get sucked in at the start of trying to follow certain methodologies. And one of the things that I learned early on is that whole percentage work within weightlifting into CrossFit doesn't always work and doesn't work for most people. So if you have a new person or someone who has a low percentage of their max of training, so let's say someone comes in, they are an untrained person and their max back squat is 50 kilos, right? If you put 85% onto that bar, they're probably going to be able to do more than 4, 5, 6 reps of that. Right. If you train someone who's been back squatting for 10 years and they have 200 kilos, if you put 85% on their back, then they're probably not going to do 6, 8 reps. They're probably going to do 2 or 3. And that's got nothing to do with anything apart from their training age and their training history. And this works for both multiple lifts and different positions as well. And I think once we, do too much of that percentage work and throwing in, it doesn't get the training stimulus that we want. And then when we go into RX loads, it makes it very difficult because some people, for their 1RM, that could be really high, and for some it could be low. And also they could be very good at lifting submaximal things. If you come from an aerobic background, rowers, for example, they have great pulling and great hinging work. So I remember we did a thing with Cam Nichols, and if you watched him deadlift at a moderate percentage, he could just go on and on and on. I saw him at Sid, no problem whatsoever, just because that is a movement he's done lots and lots before, whereas other people will find that much, much more difficult just from that. So I get that CrossFit, you're like, well, it gets balanced out because if you can do this, then the burpee's easy for you, whatever. But most people, you want a training effect. And if you put a barbell into a workout that isn't very light, it will be a very different training effect when someone is grunting and holding their breath for a 60 kg power clean and jerk. And that's much higher on the spectrum, as opposed to breathing through it and feeling like this is actually quite aerobic. And then the skills obviously don't break down and it all changes. I guess one of the questions I have, because I know, Rob, you've come from a, strong and wanting to lift weights kind of background at least. How did you feel coming into CrossFit and how that affected you?
It's funny because coming into CrossFit from the powerlifting style background, it was a good foundation for most of CrossFit itself, because I was able to muscle through a lot of the movements. So that's not necessarily a good thing, but when you're getting into CrossFit, you're like, fuck yeah, I'm already doing an 80 kilo snatch, where I definitely hadn't earned the right to have an 80 kilo snatch, but I was getting it up overhead. I was like, yes. And then when you start breaking things down, that was when I started to realize, cool, where my potential, say, was in certain things. But it I just wanted to bring it back to that point where you said there about like the 200 kilos and compared to 50 kilos. And it's just like, this is something that I've actually always I've kind of questioned. And it's like, if you have, say, a 60 kilo lifter, that's say someone a bit lighter, and they're lifting, say, 140, and it's whatever, say 3 times body weight, right? And then say you have a 100 kilo lifter that has, say, a 200 kilo back squat. When they're then doing any type of work, even though that person that's smaller is lifting less and they're obviously lifting more for their body weight, it's just, I personally feel it's just different to, say, someone lifting 200 kilos of load, even though that person might be 100 kilos compared to, say, someone that's 60 kilos. Now, what are your thoughts on that? Just, I know you've kind of reflected that question back to, say, you, but it's because the load going through the body, especially when it comes to because we're just talking about obviously with that top end strength side stuff, when there's a load going through your body and you've got a 60 kilo lifter, would you say that's similar to, say, 100 kilo with the 200 kilo squat?
That's, I guess, are we talking specifically weightlifting or kind of how that replicates to CrossFit?
No, in a way, it's a bit more towards the weightlifting side of things, because that was more the question there, because it's, go on, Ash.
I've got a take on this. So obviously the weight lifted, from a physics point of view, there's an amount of work that needs to be done. So it doesn't matter how big you are, there's an amount of work that needs to be done. If you're a bigger person, you have more energy stores, you have more muscle fibers. So in terms of a percentage of your total capacity, it's going to affect you less than a smaller person, even if it, I think where it gets really interesting is if the smaller person is stronger than the bigger person. So say you've got a 60 kilo guy who also has a 200 kilo back squat.
Yeah.
He's still smaller, but say he's got a 220, like he'd be the strongest man on earth, but he's got a 220 back squat and he weighs 60 kilos. If the weight in the workout is 150 kilos, it's a smaller percentage of his 1 rep max, but it's huge compared to his body weight.
Yeah.
How does he hold up on the reps of that weight?
Well, I can only speak to this in terms of the functionality of it, and because I come from that pro rugby background, and there was a certain amount, which I never believed until I saw it more, that obviously mass protects mass. And there's a certain amount of exactly that in terms of like forces that go through joints, even though it might not be whatever functional mass, or it might not be the specific power of any type of thing. Unfortunately, there isn't something that you can replicate with actual weight, and being able to withstand forces as opposed to just be able to produce forces. So it's a very interesting question, because it's the same thing when I look at even the top CrossFitters, is that before there was much more of like they used to be like, oh, you can be anything and blah blah blah. But then as time has gone on, it's homogenized into very much a certain type of avatar of person, and that includes height and mass. And everyone used outliers like Brent Fikowski as like an example of having that tall guy, and before him it was like Chap McKay, the Aussie. But ultimately, those were the outliers. They weren't, they weren't actually there. And then when he got knocked out, I'm a Brent Fikowski fan, because I think he's a fantastically smart athlete, and it reminds me of when I used to try and compete, and but when it comes down to it, at the top level, you cannot hide. And he could not hide when it came down to it, putting, rope climb and, squat snatch in, you just couldn't hide from being tall and finding that range of motion very difficult.
So when it comes, obviously it's now coming back to your thing with that the strength side in CrossFit, I think where my biggest struggle was, as I mentioned there, was the fact that I had strength that I could muscle stuff, which would then cause me to do things wrong. And then my ego a lot of the time would get in the way and hold me back. And it wasn't until I kind of eased off on the ego side of stuff and realized, say, potential, that was my biggest hindrance, I feel, coming from a strength background into CrossFit.
I just think sometimes trying to teach people, which is, I think us, we're all coaches here as well, even if it's one-to-one, and I don't teach many group classes anymore, but how something should feel in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So we used to call stuff grunt work. And so if you're having to pick something up and grunt, it just means that you're holding your breath. There's some kind of Valsalva maneuver in there. And it means that, your midline, your core, you're probably not in this aerobic setting where it should feel like that. And even though barbell cycling is not going to be aerobic for lots of people because of skill and their strength capacity, you can get to a point where you'd be like, actually, after you drop that bar, first things first, you can't put your hands on your knees, because that already shows that this is probably a little too high, unless it's supposed to be high. And the same thing, if you're going to deadlift and you want to make it, part of an aerobic piece, if you're having to like every single time you do that, that your muscles in your brain aren't adapting in the way that if you want to do that. And I think, like you said, being able to muscle stuff through is great, because actually you're like, great, I'm just using my muscle endurance here, because this dumbbell snatch relative to how much I can curl and press overhead is light, but am I actually, building what I want to be building? Is my heart and lung, am I teaching my actual, lactate to be flushed out of my system, or am I just requiring, so much mitochondrial density in those to just be like, great, I can actually do this purely on muscle endurance because I've done loads of this like repetitions. So with someone like yourself, I'd be like, cool, what actually you're gonna have to do is row for 30 seconds at a moderate pace before you do your dumbbell snatches, and you'll do half the amount of dumbbell snatches. So you're actually trying to teach your body to go heart, lungs, heart, lungs, heart, lungs, instead of going intramuscle, intramuscle, intramuscle. You know what I mean?
I found that massively with the deadlift, and it's like how, if any workout where they say 100 kilo deadlift, I'll be fine, and even like 140 and rep it out. But even though that's less than 140 is pretty much say 50% of my 1RM, if you put that down to say 100 kilo deadlift and then only 50 kilos deadlift, like that load, I never had the capacity for it. And that was always my biggest struggle with having strength, but then trying to apply it to CrossFit, because it never carried over.
I think it's fascinating, the difference between, like you said earlier, Jamie, the aerobic athletes and the sort of power explosive athletes. some people, Red Pill always talk about Sam Briggs as the example. Her 10 rep max is very close to her 1 rep max.
Yeah, crazy.
And other people, it's way away. So she can just keep, like anything sub max, she can just keep churning out, just keep doing work, and it doesn't really push her over her threshold. Whereas someone else who's a more powerful, explosive athlete, they need to go so far away from their one rep max to find that aerobic pacing. And using things like empty barbell or banded gymnastics might be required to get that low down their percentage to actually get the aerobic stimulus that you're talking about, which is relevant for CrossFit. So say someone's got 150 clean and jerk, what can they actually cycle without going over threshold? It's like a runner who's really quick at sprinting, like Usain Bolt compared to Kipchoge. Like Usain Bolt would have to run so slowly compared to his max speed to sustain a marathon, whereas Kipchoge, he's probably not far off his max sprint to get round for 26.2 miles. And the percentage work is such a blunt tool for prescribing CrossFit workouts based off a strength number when the stimulus intended is an aerobic one.
Yeah, totally. And we used to do this thing, it's called dampening. I think it was an OPEX or an OPT term, that someone like Rob, for example, before the Open, the month before, we would actually try and make you, and they use the term dampening, like bring the dampener down. So you'd be doing long aerobic pieces, and actually your 1RM would probably come down by 10 to 15%, but that was good. Because actually we're almost trying to push your system into being over here. So when you lift the weight, you're using less of that, strength capacity, and you're trying to make someone more aerobic. And I did an athlete camp, and I was really into CrossFit at the time. And we did a classic lactate test, which was like a 3-minute really hard piece, rest 8 minutes, I think, 3 again, rest 8, 3 again. And your score should obviously decrease because you're properly going all out. And it was like burpees and kettlebell swings and rowing. And they could see, but I'd already dampened myself. I couldn't sprint because there's very few, if not none, I think CrossFit Opens that are below 6 minutes. I think there's a 7-minute bar muscle up power snatch, right? So you shouldn't be able to even go really hard for 3, because if you can, then it means that everything is really heightened and you're really pushing those high threshold, motor units all the time. And actually, you want to bring that down and be able to obviously breathe and do all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And how do you think that sort of percentage mindset translates to gymnastics? It's not quite the same in terms of percentage of max, but in terms of movement.
Well, I think I think this goes into a good topic, because I think the upper body and the lower body also get this big split, and there's multiple points within here. But the fact that we can't really change our body mass, right? So the great thing why we love a barbell and incremental loading is to be able to just be like, I'm going to add 1 kg, great, I PB my strict press. I'm going to add 2 kg, I PB my bench press, whatever. With gymnastics, obviously, you can't really change your body weight. I mean, you can put a band on, you can change certain things, but if you're able to control 1 second longer on an eccentric of a pull-up per session you came in, that's a huge increase. But the equivalent of being able to go from 1 pull-up to 2 pull-ups, and you could only do 1 before, would be like doing your 1 RM back squat, and then the next week doing that same weight for 2 RMs. Like the fact that we don't think like that is just really, difficult to progress people correctly in their gymnastics. And it's the same thing with how I would do it. And like, I haven't actually done this in a group class, because even back when we were even though I was programming, I was head of that gym, I hadn't even thought about it enough. But if I were to go back, I'd be like, great, you're going to do your as many reps as possible strict pull-up, right? Or it could be kipping, but let's say strict, right? It just helps. And then as that number, we can use that number to then work as a percentage of whatever you want to do. So you might be like, okay, cool, we're going to get 70% of your max strict pull-up, whatever, and we're going to do whatever, that on an EMOM to build up that capacity, to give people that same kind of idea of being able to train at a percentage of their max. And obviously, my preference would be their max, actual weighted pull-up, which I remember doing a camp on, and people were crazy to think that I could put half my body weight on me and do a max pull-up. And they were like, why are you so good at these things? And how? I'm like, well, because you got to train it just like you did the back squat and the deadlift, and you're cleaning your snatch. You dip 1 RM and your pull up 1 RM, should be important to you.
Yeah.
And I think CrossFit hasn't allowed that, conversation to happen.
Do you know, it's funny you say that. So, but my dip and say pull up 1RM, again, I'm that strength athlete where pretty high, okay, so body compared to body weight, decent. But then you get me doing a body weight pull up for say multiple reps, and I just pretty much, I think the most I've ever done is maybe like say 13 strict pull-ups, and that's like when I was probably at my lightest, and like the stars aligned, everything was just right. And I've always found that when it comes to gymnastics programming, that when you do work off of like a max set, like you've hit your 10 and then you do some percentage work off that, it carries over to some degree. But when you start getting too close to the top end, like if you say do 90%, so now you got to do 9 in whatever, I've always felt it's been a bit too far into that. Go on, Ash.
It's exactly the same. You're a strength and power athlete, so you can't operate near your max.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So
that's
for you to build up
bias,
volume, you have to stay lower away compared to your 1 rep max compared to an aerobic athlete. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I know.
Cool.
I'm massively biased towards this. So.
Yeah, I find that whole paradigm, I think, and we just don't have as many, the biggest thing that bugs me is that in CrossFit, we have so many technical and different ideas around weightlifting. We have the power snatch, we've got heaving snatch balance, we've got overhead squat, we've got mid thigh, we've got 3 position snatch, we've got so many snatch off blocks, eccentric, bottom up, everything to do that. Where it comes to the pull up, and I know Ash is massively into trying get his single arm pull up, and that journey of watching him do different things just for that one movement shows that we do have such a big toolkit of things to try and improve people's gymnastics. But because of how CrossFit is biased, it doesn't kind of allow for those things to kind of come to fruition that easily.
I think also in a class environment, doing some of the stuff that like Ash does, it's just not really possible, because the amount of, you need too many coaches to make sure that, like, say, just for instance, you recently be doing your hanging lever, especially off the ring, right? So if you imagine you had the class trying to do that, like where the ones that were capable to some degree, right? But imagine that there's so many people to try to navigate that. It really would have to be in a small group PT at the most, like really, because it's so technical. And that's, I think, with especially with gymnastics, is like, when weightlifting, because you can get through positions a little bit easier and kind of get to the end. But with gymnastics, I feel it's really clear cut. You either get to the top or you don't. It's pretty clear. So it's a lot harder to say. I don't really know where I was going with it, but I feel when it comes to gymnastics, it's just harder to coach than it is the weightlifting side of things because of the abilities.
Yeah, the progressions are a lot harder to define and chunk up, and I think, that's probably what you're saying there, Jamie, is that we've got all these ways to chunk up a full snatch or a full clean and jerk and work on the specific part of the movement that somebody struggles with. The arsenal of progressions available to most CrossFit coaches is not so detailed, and you have to be a little bit more creative to see why is that person struggling with their butterfly chest to bar, what part of that movement is it that they need to work on in a little bit of isolation. So is it just the rhythm and timing, and can they do smaller butterfly gips and they'll get the timing without having to do the full movement? And that's sort of like, that's the equivalent of low percentage work in barbell cycling, in that they get a chance to refine the motor pattern and timing without the huge stresses on the body that the higher percentage work forces them to.
Yeah, I was even thinking, I think I had this chat with you, Ash, a while ago, because I hadn't been doing any kipping work for a long time. And then I thought, how can I rebuild? Yeah, we did. Like especially specifically the butterfly movement in my shoulder, but healthily. And even so, I was even thinking, you should be able to go backwards as well as forwards, at least in the shoulder, maybe not in the whole movement because of your head and, whatever. But I was like, well, for every, certain set that I should go forwards, I should at least do some, and this would be the same as, FRC, controlled articular rotation. You should go forwards and backwards. And we do that mostly in most eccentric and concentric things. So having that concept of being like, oh, if I'm going to be going around in a circle with my shoulder, can I put a dumbbell and do that a little bit, maybe in a warm up? Can I do it in both directions to try and teach some body control? And then you've seen it before. We both have, particularly with females who've got great technique, but haven't built up the time under tension on their shoulder. When they come down off that butterfly, it's genuinely like a drop. They literally like drop and flick and drop and flick. And it looks really cool. Don't get me wrong. But you're like, well, if you ask them to do it slowly, could they do it? And it'd be the same thing. If it's a, you know, you've seen it before too. There's some females, especially strict press. It's like 30 kgs. If you let them push press it, it'll be like 55 and they can jerk, you know, 80. And you're like, wow, like phenomenal, like coordination, timing, speed, power. But when it comes to strength, that's the thing, that if we shot that thing up, right, everything else would probably go up. Instead of doing more fast stuff, respect the strength continuum, go backwards. And I think in gymnastics, we've got to think about that too. You know, how can we shift them back into the strength continuum? If you're a power athlete, obviously drop the percentage of intensity, but how do we build that in people and get them, you know, excited about their incremental progressions and be like, great, you were able to do this, you were able to do that. Let's get you one more pull up, which is a huge, obviously, as we said, like a huge progression.
I think people just don't respect gymnastics the right way either. I think that one more pull up, I think just that idea of, oh, I can now do 2 pull ups compared to 1, for most is just like,
yeah, less cool.
It's just 1 rep. I mean, like, I should, it's like, and people also think I should be able to do, say, 5 or 10. It's like, because it's a body weight move. It's the understanding of the and I do think, again, it's with a barbell, it's just so easily understood, and it's because it's normally bigger numbers, and it's just like, it's cooler. So it's just that's where, as you say, all the focus is.
Yeah, I think I improved my like 30 muscle ups for time by something maybe like a minute over in a year, which is crazy, right? But then if I added 3 kgs on my snatch, I'd be like, yeah, it's like the biggest thing ever, like chasing 100 for so long. And it is just, you know, that, what do you care about? And I think we touched on it before. I don't want to go too much, but like the coaches that come, we have so many passionate, great weightlifting coaches that have come into CrossFit, but there aren't that many really passionate gymnasts that have come and helped us. And like we said before, like trying to adapt and make it applicable to a group class, you know, to the general person, to someone who doesn't have a pull-up, and actually get people really excited about that. I mean, I think it's great that people who are like overhead squatting like an empty bar still going to like a weightlifting seminar. Like, that's so cool. But the likelihood that that same person would go to a gymnastics seminar that can do a pull-up is actually really low. And that's, I think, our fault as coaches, but also just not having that expertise to be like, this is a super beginner, you know, gymnastic progression class that we can, you know, help and inspire you with.
One thing I've thought about that is that CrossFit weightlifting is much closer to weightlifting than CrossFit gymnastics is to gymnastics.
Yep.
And you will occasionally get a 1 rep max event in weightlifting, but you will never get a gymnastics routine in CrossFit. And I think that is a blocker for pure gymnastics coaches wanting to get involved in CrossFit, because they're sort of like, gymnastics isn't really about reps and volume and time and speed. It's about the purity of the positions and the movements for artistic purposes. And it's very different to that for time mentality, which is a shame, because I think if you have the pure gymnastics foundations, we see like people who come from those backgrounds and come into CrossFit, their kipping is unreal because their body control is insane. And do you remember Alessio into Jamie, who just fly around the bar because his body control was second bar none? And having a bit of time spent on that would be incredible if we could get more of that into CrossFit. Okay, let's change gears. Let's get a bit more towards the competing side of things. And I know one thing that you have a potentially controversial opinion about is open workouts and whether to repeat or not to repeat. What do you think about that?
So it's obviously, you know, with most answers, it depends on who you are. But when it comes to it, if you're taking the open as a participation thing, do it, set your goals before. I think Ash said I've released videos. I spent so much time doing those videos, hence why I haven't done them after I think 2 or 3 years of doing them. They were so time consuming, and there's a time constraint because obviously I want to do it so I can feel it. I want to watch people do it. I want to gather information. I need to record it before pretty much Friday night UK time, because people mostly do on a Saturday. And no one wants to watch an open video and get jazzed up about it at 10 p.m. on Friday. So I was like I was literally having to like not work the whole of Friday to prep myself, do all this stuff, record at 12, edit it, boom. Anyway, if you're doing it, make sure you set your goals before. If your goals are participate and complete it. So many people just don't finish the 5th workout or the 4th workout because it's really draining. If that's your goal, it's a huge one. 5 hard workouts for 5 weeks. Just say yes, tick the box. Next year, see what you're going to do. If it's just going RX or workouts, then just do that. But then if you're in that middle zone, and when I say middle, broadly like a year to 3 years into CrossFit, right? Or you want to do it to be a friend of yours or be on the leaderboard, or I used to look at my like Europe, worldwide, whatever. And I'm going to say this, you should repeat the workout because you will do better, most likely. And if you don't, it's fine. It's part of the sport. And I think the biggest thing is when I watch like Ant, for example, prep for regionals, we were back then one of the latest regions. So back then it was like 1 week, and you got 3 regions around the world, right? I think Asia was 3rd or 4th. I saw him do every single regional workout maybe 8 to 10 times, right? Which is crazy. But if you have the chance, that I use it with rugby, if you have the chance to play the same game and to improve on the things, I missed that offload, I dropped the ball, I missed touch, right? You would do it. You'd go back and be like, I want that exact environment to do it again. And in CrossFit, why we love it is that you get that every day. You can control whatever you want to do and you can improve on it if you want to, right? And this is the one time you've got one thing in mind and you can just execute. And if you think you can do it better, then do it better. And if you can't, then you can't. Yeah. But know that, yes, if you go really hard, which is the lunge workout came up to me, because I did repeat that workout. And I think it was over 10 rounds. And that was like 200 plus walking lunges. So it was 400 in like 4 days. And I was so sore, but I improved, right? Yeah. Purely from watching my video to be like, all right, I need to hit this clock. I actually went faster. I'm a good pacer, faster splits for the last 3. And that proved to me I had slightly more. So if I just kept the same speed and went 3 splits faster, I improved. And it was so painful. And it wasn't until my coach at the time, Max Elhaj, who's Noah and Travis Mayer's coach, he literally said to me, like, your soreness in your legs, it does not determine what's going to happen. Like DOMS is an indicator, but it's not the thing. Like it's just a byproduct of lots of other things. This is an aerobic workout. Your aerobic system will be recovered, right? So just go for it. And it wasn't until certain people actually said those specific things to me to be like, if you want to do better, then do better. Nothing's worse than someone saying, oh, if I didn't do that and the chalk bucket was over here, I would have beaten you. I'm like, go and beat me then. Just go for it. And I don't even mind if your goal is to do every workout once, which was mine, I think, in 2017 when I competed against Tim. And I think one workout, he must have repeated and actually beat me. But I was like, no, that my goal is to do it. And then also, obviously, to win the workout. I still won the workout. Like, you're still playing the sport. So that's fine. The rugby game, you still won the final. If you played them the next year and it's in the season and you lose it, it's just a different game. Yeah. So just try and think of it like that. Don't try and be like, well, now I'm not as good as them. No, you beat them at the time. If they want to repeat and beat you, that's fine. They're a better learner. They have more resilience. They've got mental headspace. They've got different goals to you, whatever that may be. Yeah. But the skill and the specificity of learning from the sport is why we actually love it. So if you do want to repeat, just go for it. But equally, go for it with a goal.
That I think is the biggest thing, is if you are going to redo it, the goal that you have, the plan that you put in place to do that second time, you must stick to, because it's then when you get the competitive side where you're repeating it, say, and if there is someone else there, so then you're then trying to beat them. So then but that should be what the first one's for. The first one's there to have a rough idea, like, cool, I'm going to do it like this, and I'm going to work as hard as I can, and I'll probably be up against someone and try and beat them. So the second time is where it has to be a lot more calculated. I thought, right, this is what went wrong then. This is how I'm going to approach, and so forth. And I think that's a big thing, that if you do repeat, make sure the plan is in place there based on that first one, and you stick to it.
Yeah, I think your point you made there, Jamie, about reviewing your tape is crucial, because that's the information you can use to actually make your repeats knowingly better. Like, you know that you finished that workout with 3 fast rounds, so you had more in the tank. So you also know that it was within you to produce a better score. So when you're repeating the workout and you increase, like you do faster splits, you know in your head that you could have done more last time. So you have absolute confidence that the new strategy is going to result in a better score. And it gives you that inner dialogue of, I know this hurts. If this was the first time round, I might feel like I need to slow down. But actually, I've watched this tape and I know that I finished fresh last time. So me going harder this time is going to produce a better score, and I'm going to hang on because I've seen that 3 days ago my body produced this score, and I'm not less fit in 3 days. And I think that's really powerful for just the psychological side of things. In when you are repeating and you have got DOMs, if it's a workout like that especially, and it's just get through it, you can tolerate the pain so much better than the uncertainty of, like, I don't know if I'm going to blow out and, you know, have to slow down by the end of this 20-minute AMRAP.
Yeah, and different things make sense for that. Like, obviously, if you're using a muscle group over and over and over and over, then yes, you might have something really specific and you won't be able to do better. But I think the bigger ones are when people get really upset when handstand push-ups from like the back end, and they're like, oh, but I had 4 minutes to do handstand push-ups, and then I did 10, and then I did 5, and then it was like no rep, 3, no rep 2. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. You know, you're probably going to do better just by pacing it better.
Yeah.
So just have a think about that and go at it like that. And it sounds, the tape review thing, I've learned so much from just watching it. But there's been times where I've genuinely like had my thing on an iPad and I literally am watching myself do it 4 days before, and I'm doing it at the same time. And if mentally you're watching yourself and you're like, I can't do this, and you can't do it. But if you look at it, like Ash said, and you're like, do you know what? I had a plan here. I know I felt okay and I had a bit more to give. Just stay here for 3 minutes and then let's make a decision. Because the problem is, I've seen so many people also start and then stop, right? Because they know. And I'm like, you need to have the confidence to be like, I'm going to commit to this one time only. If you're that person, by the way, I would recommend you actually do the workout on the Friday, but do it at 80% and do it for 70% of the time. So just go in and just either cut the reps down or cut the time domain down and just move through it. So that whole feeling of excitement and fear just gets dulled down, and then go in and actually do it. Even the day after, for most people, they'll probably be fine, but a couple of days after, because so much of it is that anxiety and built in, like, I'm going to split this, I'm going to do that, and you actually just have to be like, I'm actually just do it. Like, it's just another workout. Most of the time, it's just another workout. Go and like enjoy it, but prep yourself for me, like a rugby game. The night before, what are you eating? Like, am I going to warm up like this? And do the same thing, get into the routine and don't get thrown off. I was really bad at it because obviously was a coach, so I don't have to, this clock, you're on a lap and everyone's in, it's really buzzy. So that might not be the environment for you. And if it's not, then just respect that and try and find what works for you.
I think the stress part, you said that like the anxiety and all that lot of the Friday night light style thing is massive, because it just shows you, and even like the open workouts in general, how you feel after an open workout compared to say a normal, say in your training plan workout, just shows how much harder you've pushed. And you've literally done potentially like say a 12-minute workout and you're fucked for the rest of the day. So because you've done a 12 and you're like, that was 12 minutes of what? How am I? But you've just given it everything on top of the stress and all. It's a unique experience. It's great.
Something else I wanted to get your thoughts on, Jamie, which does carry over to open performance really well, is positional breath work. I remember speaking with you about this before and how people neglect that aspect of their training. Could you give the listeners just a bit, what is positional breath work and how would you approach it for somebody?
Yeah, I think it's something that we sometimes talk about, and I often ask clients at the end of something, how do they feel? And some people are like, oh, my forearms exploded, I need to work on my grip. And they're like, great, I'll do some strongman stuff, I'll do some carries, whatever. Or like, oh, my lungs were really, really bad and I was really out of breath, I'm going to add some extra assault bike or rowing or whatever in it. But there's quite a lot of people, like deadlift and thruster, I think are two big ones that come up a lot. They're just like, I just find it so hard to breathe in that position. Like, I just can't make this aerobic. I just can't cycle this. I just have to drop the bar. And then I'm like hyperventilating. And then I pick up and it feels like it's fine, like a sprint. And then I drop it and I'm like, and that to me, for so many reasons, and obviously we can go into like the mobility side of things, which is obviously huge, but as a skill itself, I think you need to respect that you want to try and work and breathe in those positions. So using the thruster, for example, you know, it is mostly probably going to be the front squat that's going to be difficult for you to breathe in, particularly at the bottom. You know, can you just be in the bottom of your squat and breathe? You know, if you can't do that, then the likelihood is that when you put a bar on in front of you, if it's 43 kgs, it's going to be much harder. So you could just practice with being like, in my warm-ups, I'm just going to sit in the bottom of my squat and try and take some breaths. You know, you can do some, you know, breath holding, you could do box breathing, you can do whatever you want, but ultimately spending time in that position and actually breathing, and then trying to progress that in multiple ways. I think the cadence rowing is a good example. I remember that seminar with Cam Nichols. Different times you're going to have to row at different stroke rates. And I think sometimes when your legs are gone, you're having to go in and out more to produce an amount of power, but you don't train yourself to breathe like that. So I think a nice, really simple thing is to be like, all right, I'm going to row my 2K PR time, you know, sub 3 seconds, right? And I'm going to do 500 meters of that. And I'm going to do it at 18 strokes per minute, rest a couple minutes. At that 20 strokes per minute, rest a couple minutes, at 22, at 24, and just trying to teach yourself to be able to produce power in an aerobic setting, but with different types of breathing, because that's what CrossFit ultimately does to us. Because it's all fine when we do thrusters and we're fresh and it's on an EMOM and that's where we practice, but ultimately we have to learn to breathe with so many different types of both positions and different loads, that we have to know that actually maybe we'll do 3 unbroken here, or maybe we'll do 5, or maybe we'll do our wall balls. You know, I ended up wall balls because thrusters were really difficult for me, always have been, even wall balls were. I knew aerobically that I would do 6 wall balls every 20 seconds. And I think Ash that's literally seen me and everyone's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I know this is my absolute threshold to be able to do 50 wall balls, and I'm really bad at wall balls, but I knew that this was how I would. If I did 8 every 30, that would be too much breath holding that I would redline, and then I would not be able to hold it. So for exactly what I needed, you should do the same. And wall balls is a great example, because just play with it. You do wall balls so often, to be like, all right, I'm going to try and do this 20 unbroken and then have a 30-second rest. Or I'm going to do 10 unbroken, rest 10 seconds, 10 unbroken, rest 10 seconds, because obviously there's a transition time. It's the same amount of work, but different types of breathing. Mm-hmm. And you will find what works for you best, instead of just being like, I'm going to wait until I feel like I can't hold my breath anymore, which is most of the time in CrossFit. Yeah. And then I'm going to stop. And then I'm going to start again, but I feel like I'm not going to die. And then I'm going to stop, Yeah. So that's kind of my really small take on a very obviously deep topic.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. I actually reference your 6 wall balls every 20 seconds to a lot of my athletes as just going into the open, having an idea of your jog forever pace. Like if I send someone out for a low intensity zone 2 jog, and I'll just put at the speed you could run forever, because it's just so within you that you're not taking on lactic acid and everything else. You need to know what they are, so that at the very worst, when if you have redlined in a workout, you can still keep making progress with 6 wall balls every 20 seconds, and you're not at least digging a deeper hole. And that's sort of your starting point to calibrate towards a threshold. So if it's a really short workout, you could increase the wall balls per second. But if it's a long workout or high volume workout, then maybe at that level or slightly below it if it's really, really tough. And having those numbers in your back pocket, I think, just empowers you to attack workouts with confidence again, rather than just making something up 5 minutes before you approach the open.
On that, I think that also boils down to experience as well. And obviously where you've had so much experience, and this is what I think people undervalue as well, that you've blown out, you've done it, you've gone too slow, you've gone too fast, but the thing is, you haven't just done that. You've then taken note of that and say, right, that is, and this is what I think a lot of people, especially within CrossFit classes in general, they'll do say the strength piece, and then they'll get into the conditioning bit, and they'll just do the workout.
Yeah.
And they're even if they go, cool, it's only if I redo this workout I know if I've got better. And it's like, and I remember I used to always say this in classes, and I was like, these workouts, you don't need to redo them. You're trying to take pieces. You might want to slow down your row and go faster on your, say, power snatches, because you want to see what it's like to cycle 10 unbroken. And people are so bothered about just doing the workout faster. It's like, but you've missed the point of training, and that you're competing, which we've done a podcast on before, the training and competing. And it's like understanding that difference. And in the class environment, it's all well and good if you want to beat your mate. But if you are trying to get better, you need to understand what the effect has had on your body.
Yeah, I think that goes into, that point that we spoke, and I love it because it's the Yoda quote, and I think it's the only bit of artwork that I've actually bought. But it says, do or do not, there is no try. And this whole concept of like effort and reward and just putting the work in, I think is great. At the start of anyone's fitness journey or anything they do, just showing up. We say it with new clients, just getting to the gym and doing your warm up is enough, right? But it gets to a point where you have to train smart and not just hard. And exactly what you said there, Rob, just to be like, okay, what's my goal in this workout? There's been times where I've done burpees and then power snatches and my triceps start to like fatigue and I miss a rep. Right. So what I want to do is get as close to that, but not miss a rep, and how, like, I'm going to try and go hard on this and hold. And I use rowing or the assault bike because it didn't used to have the little, like, they used to just tick over. So it's really hard to know what pace you were really going at until you got that extra calorie. But to use the rowing to be like, all right, I'm actually going to row at this pace to create this kind of feeling. And then I'm going to go and do this bit of work, or the other way around. I'm going to do this chunk of work and see if I can hold this pace. And I remember when we were at interview, people were so upset that we were getting people to literally write down their, times and scores and try and figure out, like, I used to say, like, if you want to do this, have your splits. So, if it's a 12-minute AMRAP and you want to get 4 rounds, is your first round 1 minute, the next 1:30, the next 2:30? Because that's an issue. Because if you probably did it as 2:22, you'd probably go a bit faster. And then you'd actually understand positions are better, techniques better, lower back less fatigued, all of that stuff.
That becomes offensive though to members. You say it to members. I remember saying it to people. They're like, "What you saying? I've got to go slower in the first round, but I can go so much faster."
Yeah, agreed. And it is a really hard one, and it doesn't. I think until you get, the benefits of what people feel like. It's a hard one to learn for sure. I think the easiest way to do it is, I used to do this test with, I did it with a really good client of mine who's now a really good friend, but it was 5K row, but every 500 meters, you have to go faster. Doesn't say where you have to start.
Negative
doesn't
splits,
say you have to finish, but it has to be negative splits. And for me, that as an athlete is such a good understanding, because that's your ego. You can go as fast as you want. You go out as fast as you can. But the goal is, right, to finish, but with negative splits. And unless people can do that and finish and be like, I'm proud of my time, they don't know their engines. And if you can't do it in a 5K row, how the hell are you going to do it with like touch and go, power clean, pull-ups and handstand push-ups? Like, until you understand what that feels like and how you know how to push that intensity, doing it in a mixed setting becomes much more complicated, obviously.
Yeah, spot on. And that's it's great that you do that, because the way I explain it to my clients is, if you're doing a 5K run for time, your first kilometer wouldn't be lightning quick, second kilometer lightning quick, and then third bomb. Like, you want to be running at a consistent pace and have a fast finish. And if you can't, then you probably fucked it up. And it is that simple, but people try to, they just think, I feel fresh, I can go faster at the expense of my later rounds. And that results in a worse time, which is another great thing about reviewing tape. Like, one of my athletes was doing a qualifier, and I think it was 60 wall balls, 30 bar muscle up, 60 wall balls.
Oh.
And did a huge, maybe like 10 unbroken muscle ups to start. And then it was down to 5s, and then down to 3s. And then there's a couple of no reps, and there's a few no reps in the first few wall balls as well, because they were so fatigued that they couldn't get their accuracy in. And when reviewing the tape, like, well, you did your 30 muscle ups in 2 minutes 20. So if we do 5 every 20 seconds, is that right? Yeah, if we do 5 every 20 seconds, you're going to be 20 seconds faster. So you don't need that huge set of 10. You just do small sets steadily, and they knocked a minute off a 7-minute workout just because they chunked up the work more evenly. And until you've experienced that, I think it's hard to buy in, but consistent splits always win.
I guess that does also then always boil down to the type of athlete that you are, and when you understanding your like what you go to the gym for, and then that was where, like, when we're talking to, say, the members of the class and so forth, and you're saying, right, this is what you need, but some people are just there just to work out. They don't give a fuck. They're just like, I just want to finish this, work as hard as I can, then cool. But it's then when that person comes to you, it's like, why am I not getting better? It's like, well, this is why, because you're not at a stage, or you're not ready to maybe break things down. But when you are, then we can talk again and start to learn. And it's that understanding of where you are in your journey.
And the hilarious thing about it is that is working harder. You're doing the same amount of work in less time. So if you have even splits in a 5K run, you get a faster time. So you've done 5K faster, which is more work. But people think that because they're in the hurt locker sooner, they're doing more work. But actually, they've dropped off so much that actually the exertion overall is less. And the performance is obviously less as well.
Do you know, I remember, just because of that hurt locker thing, I remember, do you remember the workout, and you coached me through it, when it was the 31 thrusters and 31 pull-ups? It was like one of the last opens. So it started 33, I think. It was so much higher, wasn't it? Yeah. And it was, you was just like, and you were saying to me, look, break it up like this, pace it, like the whole thing. And I got through it, finished it, and there were people that were then not finishing it because they were over egging themselves, and that was the thing. I went at such a pace, and I was like, I think I'm going too slow. I think I'm going. He's like, no, trust me. So, and I listened, and I was just like, wow. It's like, and then I got to the end. Don't get me wrong, I was able to then get fast at the end, but I was just like, wow, I finished it within the time gap and stuff like that, and in a good time. So it's that was massive.
It's super cool, isn't it? And I remember the person who went before you went fast and then went off a cliff, so you could see it happen. And you still emptied the tank at the end. Do you know what I mean? That you're almost in a rush to get to that pain stage. Like the last 2 minutes, fine, like go hell for leather. But if you can't crank it up at the end, you've gone too fast too soon.
Yeah, and I think now more than ever, you start to see workouts where it's like, here's the amount of work, rest 2 minutes, and here it is again. The grid did it, which was really cool. I'm annoyed it didn't take off, but they used to call it Jack and Jill, where you do the workout forwards, have a rest, and go backwards. And obviously they copied it at the games, but showing that repeatability is basically the games anyway. The rests are just longer, obviously, between events, but that's actually what you should encourage people to do, to be like, okay, and I've done this before where it's like 8-minute AMRAP, let's say rowing burpees, right? Rest 2 minutes, 8-minute AMRAP, kettlebell swing, wall ball, and then rest 2 minutes, 8-minute AMRAP, rowing burpees. And your goal is to get the same score as the first 8 minutes, and then you rest 2 minutes and you do it again, because that would be the same as doing proper aerobic training. You would run a mile, rest whatever, run a mile, rest a mile. And when they're like, oh, I couldn't do it. And I'm like, then clearly you're going too hard on the first one, right? And that is, to me, it's so simple. It's boring. People say it's boring, but you can make it interesting in a class. You can go 5-minute AMRAP, rest 1 minute, 5-minute AMRAP, but the movements do have to be the same. And just be like, cool, like I'm giving you 1 minute rest. It's basically the same as doing a 10-minute AMRAP, right? But with a minute rest. So you should do better. Right, it's a better score. So what's your problem? And that's when people get a bit upset with them. That's the easiest way for me to say to do it, because then you're like, all right, let's just see what you're made of then. Like if you think you can hold this pace, you did it for the first 5 minutes, and with a 1 minute rest, do it again.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's been awesome, mate. Thank you. I want to be respectful of your time. So just to wrap up, what are you up to training wise yourself at the moment?
I am still doing some. I think I spoke to Ash about it a bit, trying to do a bit more stuff on my knee. And because of rugby, I realized I basically had one sidestep and one dummy. So ever since I was 9, I've literally stepped left, right the whole time. And if I'm on my right already, I basically hitch kick. So I do the whole like lift the knee up, then just carry on going straight. So, having had 2 knee injuries and then a broken leg as well, I'm trying to do stuff for that. But actually, in the past few weeks, I've wanted to actually do a little more CrossFit. And really just because I'm missing with COVID and everything, kind of the community side. And my best friend Morgan, he's at WIT now, so I've been a few times and just joined a couple of the WIT Gone Bad sessions, which has been difficult to say the least. Some of the programming has been challenging for me, but it's been a lot of fun. So I think knee prehab, rehab, and just strengthening. When I say that, I still want to be able to like split squat a good amount of weight. I still want to be able to like good morning of just work on certain positions but still load them, and then do a bit of CrossFit really for fun. And then I'm tempted to try and do some aerobic development again, but it's just a lot of time. Like I heard Rob, like getting on your bike for like a couple hours.
Yeah.
You just have to find the time to do it.
Yeah.
But the
That's why I got to start at 6 a.m.
Exactly. But it transfers so much to so many other things in terms of like recovery and actually getting good blood flow and inflammation. And when you keep it at a low level, it does feel really good. And you do get that like 5-minute endorphin buzz that you did at the end of CrossFit without all of like the contractions and the joint ache and whatever. So it's definitely on the horizon. I'm hopefully going to build a little studio, a bit like yours, Robert, in the back of my garden. So then I'll have a bit more flexibility to train, and then I will have no excuses for like getting up in the morning before the kids wake up and actually doing like 30 minutes is long for me. Don't judge me. On some kind of aerobic piece.
That sounds great, mate. And where can the listeners find out more about you? What are your links and socials?
Yeah, so I'm at LauJKB on Instagram. My training company is called The Training Lab, so you can go on my website if you want to. But yeah, anyone can drop me a line. I'm more than happy to chat further.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation as always. And to everybody listening, thank you for your time again. At lunge.lift on Instagram. Give us a follow. 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. Always gratefully received. Thank you very much for your time, and we will speak to you next week.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.